1914. A small island, no city, no crowd of people, only a lighthouse and a mystery hidden deep in the ocean. The film begins with a ship sailing through the South Atlantic Ocean, headed toward its destination. On board is a weather officer named David. They are en route to an island hidden in the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean. The government sent David there to observe the island's changing weather patterns. He was supposed to stay for about a year to collect data and understand strange climatic shifts before returning. The ship's captain was taking David to the island, along with a year's supply of food and essentials. After a long journey, they finally reach the island. Using a small boat, they land on the shore and bring their supplies. On the island stands a lighthouse and a small house where David is to stay. A previous weather officer had lived there, but his duty had ended. From today, David becomes the island's new weather officer, and the old officer, Robert, would return with the captain. But when they entered the house, they were shocked. There was no trace of any human. Furniture was scattered. Everything was in disarray. They assumed someone might be in the lighthouse. David and the captain hurried there, only to find a bizarre sight. The lighthouse was surrounded by sharp wooden stakes, as if someone had intentionally sealed it off to prevent entry. They knocked several times but received no response. Eventually, they forced their way in. At the top of the lighthouse, they found a man named Gruner lying down. When asked about the previous officer, Gruner casually said, "He died. Some terrible illness." When the captain inquired about the body, Gruner replied even more strangely, "Maybe someone killed him." David and the captain were alarmed. Maybe Gruner wasn't mentally stable, but they had no way to confirm anything without the previous officer's whereabouts. The captain offered David the choice to return with them, but David, knowing that accurate weather reports could earn him good money, decided to stay. He was given a gun for protection. Maybe the island wasn't as safe as it looked. After the ship left, David settled into the house. In a drawer, he found a diary of the former officer who had arrived on the island in 1913. The diary contained scattered notes about the island, many unclear and incomplete. There were also strange sketches of creatures. David assumed the officer was lonely and drew them for pastime. A page even held a photo of the officer's wife. Reading the diary, David eventually fell asleep. The next morning, he began his work. But near the sea, he noticed some oddly arranged rocks and seashells, forming strange patterns. He thought maybe Gruner had done it and resumed his task, collecting weather data. While working, he looked through binoculars and saw another figure with Gruner at the lighthouse. He dismissed it as imagination. Night came. While David was working, there was a knock at the door. He thought it might be Gruner and called out, but no answer. As he approached with a lamp, strange sounds echoed. Then he saw a non-human hand reaching under the door. It was some sort of creature. David panicked and hid in the basement. Soon, the creature entered the house, searching for him. From a crack, David saw its terrifying eyes staring at him. He grabbed a knife and stabbed through the crack, injuring it. The creature screamed and fled, but could return. David tied the basement door shut and stayed awake all night in fear. The next morning, he saw non-human footprints in the sand, leading to the ocean. Now he understood. Gruner's wooden barricade around the lighthouse was for these creatures. David realized the house wasn't safe. The creature might return tonight. Terrified, he ran to the lighthouse, begging Gruner to let him in. But Gruner refused, saying, "You should have left with the ship." David returned and fortified his house, barricading windows, surrounding it with spikes, placing papers and books outside the gate, and dousing them in oil, to use fire as a deterrent. That night, he discovered a box with a gun and bullets, giving him some courage. Still, he was scared. As night fell, he sat silently with the gun. Suddenly, he saw multiple creatures emerging from the ocean, all approaching his house. They began breaking the gate. David opened fire. Some fell, but the rest grew more aggressive. They tried entering. David set fire to the papers outside. The fire frightened the creatures. They fled into the sea. But the fire spread to the wooden house. David, wrapped in a blanket, escaped and hid behind a large rock near the lighthouse. His right hand was badly burned. Rain started, slowly putting out the fire. By morning, his house was reduced to ashes. To survive, David needed shelter in the lighthouse. He took his rifle and hid among nearby rocks. When Gruner came up from water, a strange creature beside Gruner attacked David. Gruner stopped it and said, "It's my pet." David didn't shoot, but demanded shelter in the lighthouse in exchange for food and gunpowder he had. Gruner agreed. The next morning, the creature licked David's wounded hand, miraculously healing it. David was shocked. Gruner counted bullets, and the creature assisted him. David realized the creature wasn't violent. He wanted to learn more and reveal this to the world. Because what stood before him was a miracle, a strange female creature from the ocean depths. If her truth came out, both he and Gruner would become famous. But Gruner didn't want fame or to leave the island. He believed society forced people to be servants or slaves. Here he was king, free to live as he pleased. He had written Gruner as king all over the island. But how did the female creature become his pet? One day she got trapped in Gruner's fishing net as a juvenile. He saved her, and she began staying with him, obeying his commands. But Gruner was harsh, keeping physical relations with her and punishing her when she retaliated. Eventually, she submitted to him completely. That's why the other sea creatures emerged every night, to take her back. But they couldn't attack during daylight. David now wanted to leave the island, signaling any passing ship. Gruner told him no ships came this way. David didn't believe him. As evening approached, Gruner warned David to be ready with his gun. The creatures would attack again. David and Gruner manned the lighthouse, its light blazing. Soon a horde of creatures emerged from the sea. Gruner fired constantly, but David, gripped with fear, backed into a corner and fainted. Gruner fought them alone. The next morning, Gruner angrily woke David and said, "If you want to stay in the lighthouse, you'll follow my rules. Fetch water, do chores, stand guard at night." David had no choice. He now did all of Gruner's tasks, but hated how Gruner mistreated the female creature. David felt Gruner's mental state was deteriorating from years of isolation. Still, he obeyed. Every night they fought the creatures. Gradually, David's fear faded. One night, Gruner locked David outside during the attack so he could learn to defend himself. David cried for help, but Gruner didn't respond. By morning, David was soaked in blood outside the gate. He had learned to fight. She was no longer there, but in the same place he saw a small creature holding the boat. David threw his torch into the center of the circle to show that he had no intention of fighting. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He wanted to make peace, to befriend them. Moments later, Aneris emerged from the sea waves, followed by a whole group of creatures rising from the ocean. But this time, none of them attacked David, because they too wanted peace. Their only wish was to find a safe place for their children, something every living being desires. They didn't like the sudden arrival of humans on the island, which is why they attacked every night. But who would make Gruner understand this? He still saw himself as the king of the island. Gruner came out of the lighthouse with a gun in hand. David tried to explain that these creatures didn't want to fight. They wanted peace. But Gruner wouldn't listen to anyone. He shouted at Aneris to go inside. But for the first time, Aneris didn't obey him. She was no longer his servant. She was now a mother, standing for her children. Gruner began to feel weak from within because no one was following his orders anymore. Enraged, he walked toward the lighthouse. David thought maybe Gruner had finally understood that every creature desires freedom and no one wants to live as a slave. But Gruner wasn't a wise man. As soon as he reached the lighthouse, he fired a flare from a signal gun, which struck the baby creature directly, killing it instantly. All the creatures fled in fear, and Aneris lost all trust in David. Maddened with rage, David ran toward the lighthouse and confronted Gruner. He started fighting with him, asking why he did all this when they only wanted peace. But Gruner had become so violent that he decided to kill David. As he raised an axe to strike, David called him by his real name, Robert. Hearing this, Gruner froze. In truth, Robert was never like this. After arriving on the island, his mental state had deteriorated. Loneliness, his wife's death, and deep depression had turned him into this. He was never truly a killer. He was once a good man. The creatures never wanted to fight. They only sought peace. Gruner killed them just to feel powerful. Now, realizing his mistake, Gruner surrendered himself to the creatures, and within moments they killed him. David locked himself inside the lighthouse. Time passed. A year later, a government officer arrived on the island with a new weather officer. David was taken away, and the new officer started monitoring the weather on the island. But the officer thought David was Gruner, and David didn't correct his misunderstanding. He quietly went to the balcony and stood there without saying a word, because now he too didn't want to leave the island, just like Gruner. Meanwhile, Inaris was happy with her family. They no longer feared anyone like Gruner. Now they could live freely both on the island and in the sea,